Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy, and so that's good to have you here tonight on Wednesday, the 25th of January, otherwise known as Burns Night. And joining us this evening, I'm very pleased to say that we have Maureen Watt. Maureen, hello. Thank you for.
Hi there.
Hello,
Happy
thank you for.
Burns Day.
Yes. Oh,
Sorry about that.
you're in demand. You're in demand. So, Maureen, yeah, I'll just start reading the first item and let you um, gather your thoughts. Yeah. Okay. So, I'll start with their usual daily Ukraine update, and today is day 336. The Biden administration has approved sending 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine as international reluctance to send tanks to the battlefront against the Russians begins to erode. The news came after Germany confirmed it will make 14 of its Leopard 2A6 tanks available for Ukraine's war effort and give partner countries its permission to re-export other battle tanks to aid Kiev. On top of the German company of Leopard 2A6 tanks, Finland, Spain and the Netherlands will also contribute vehicles of the same model, according to German media reports. A second battalion will be made up of Leopard 2A4 tanks supplied by Poland and Norway. President Volodymyr Zelensky has welcomed a decision by Germany to supply his country with Leopard 2 battle tanks and said he is sincerely grateful to Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The Russian embassy in Germany has accused Berlin of abandoning its historical responsibility to Moscow and of taking the conflict in Ukraine to a new level of confrontation. Ukraine's state broadcaster, Suspiln, has reported that in the last 24 hours, one person was killed in Kherson Oblast due to the Russian shelling. 6 others were injured, and 10 others were wounded in Donetsk Oblast. It said over the past 24 hours, the Russian Federation carried out 4 missile and 26 airstrikes, as well as more than 100 shellings from multiple launch rocket systems in Ukraine. At the same time, the aviation of the Ukrainian Defence Forces carried out 8 strikes on areas where Russian troops were concentrated, destroying an Su-25 and 3 Ka-52 attack helicopters. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has set its doomsday clock, intended to illustrate existential risks to the world, at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to midnight the clock has ever been since it was first introduced in 1947. The Russian Defence Ministry said on Wednesday the frigate Admiral Gorskov has tested its strike capabilities in the Western Atlantic Ocean, running a computer simulation on hypersonic Zircon missiles, which have a range of 900 kilometres. The European Court of Human Rights said on Wednesday that a case brought by the Netherlands against Russia over the downing of passenger flight MH17 in July 2014 was admissible. The court ruling found that areas in eastern Ukraine in separatist hands were, from the 11th of May 2014 and up to at least the 26th of January 2022, under the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation. Russia's oldest human rights organisation, the Moscow-Helsinki Group, was liquidated on Wednesday after a Moscow court ruled it did not have the correct registration with Russia's Justice Ministry. The United Nations Cultural Agency, UNESCO, said on Wednesday that it had designated the historic centre of Odessa on Ukraine's Black Sea coast a World Heritage Site in danger. Maureen, what was I going to say? I was struck by, and anything, I was most struck in there about the world's doomsday clock being closer to midnight than it ever has been before. And there's been a lot of talk in the news, as you'll know, about these tanks that are going to the Ukraine. Do you think the tanks are going to secure peace or end the war, or do you think we should be more concerned about some kind of escalation?
Well, listening to Russia's response of the commitment of NATO allies to tanks, it would seem that they are not frightened off in any way, shape, or form, and say that there will be repercussions. It's very interesting that now that the US has committed tanks, and that everyone or many more countries are committing tanks too. Um, I understand it's probably up to about 100 tanks, whereas Ukraine are saying they need about 300. And I, as is per normal, I suspect they won't be there, immediately or in the next few weeks. So I think the reports from the Donbass are pretty worrying, that Ukraine is losing ground. So the quicker these tanks are deployed, the better. But given that there are so many different types, I suspect there will be a need for very quick and intense training of the Ukrainian troops to use them. But they also seem to be going through armory pretty quickly, and there is, it would appear, also a need for other types of weaponry and more sophisticated drones. I think the longer term outlook for Ukraine looks better, but I still think it's a war that's not going to end anytime soon. And winter is there. It seems quite severe, and there are no signs of spring yet. So it's pretty awful for the troops involved
Yeah, I think
and the civilians.
yeah, I think you'll probably be right, Maureen. I'm just reminded of the three words that Zelensky said at the start of the conflict. He said we need three things, and it was munitions, 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 or the like. But and I heard a commentator today saying that when spring does come, when the weather does improve, then you can be sure that Russia will make another push. But anyway, so I better move on to the next story. The SNP has welcomed a new poll which found 52% of Scottish voters would vote for the SNP. The poll, carried out by Find Out Now for the National, also concluded 55% of voters would back pro-independence parties at the next general election. Commenting on the poll, the SNP's Scotland spokesperson, Dr Philippa Whitford MP, said, "The people of Scotland are sick and tired of opposition parties' continuous denial of Scottish democracy. With the Tories and Labour united in their pro-Brexit stance and the Liberal Democrats just going along with it, it's clear that only the SNP are willing to stand up for Scotland's rightful place in the EU and single market, and only independence will deliver that." She went on to say, "The three UK parties are also united in their denial of Scottish democracy, but they should be in no doubt. The longer they block the people of Scotland's right to choose, the stronger our case will become." So, Maureen, this was interesting. It's that the company that took carried out the poll for the National is called Find Out Now. It seems that they're known for being very cheap and very fast, which reminded me of a triangle that used to get cited a lot where I used to work. Said you can have three. There are three things, but you can only have two of them. One of them is you can have it cheap and you can have it quickly, but then you won't get the quality. Or you can have the quality and you can have it quickly, but it won't be cheap. There's whatever way you configure that. And then I was also the main point about what was in the case there was this change of emphasis from by the SNP onto Scottish democracy being at threat. Do you think that's what's leading to these kind of good figures for independence at the moment and the SNP?
Well, as you say, Brian, we shouldn't rely on one poll, and I haven't heard of that polling organisation. There seems to be new polling organisations come on the scene virtually on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think they're all
But it's
hoping
the
to.
trend.
So I think they're all hoping to do what Nadine Zahawi did when become a millionaire and found a. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop interrupting.
Maybe. But I think, we have to look at the trends. And when you think back to 2014, the support for independence was about a third against, and a third undecided. And now the polls are showing at least 45% and over as a starting position before any campaign. So I think all bodes well for a majority, not just of the seats. Hopefully, we get, a huge numbers like we did in 2015, but also a majority of the votes. And, they probably might not all come to the SNP, but if they come to independence parties, that must surely count as well. And if it's over 50% of those voting, then surely to goodness, if the Westminster government, of whichever hue, believes in democracy and a way forward for a nation of the UK to gain its independence, that must surely be the trigger point when they are going to, all of them, deny the referendum, which would be the most obvious way. So, looks good.
Yes, and that figure of being over 50% voters for the SNP, that kind of neuters the argument that you often hear from the likes of Douglas Ross, that the SNP may well have won the majority of seats in Holyrood or the majority of seats in Westminster, but more people in Scotland voted for unionist parties and maybe split the vote. So that kind of like does away with that position, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I just remembered or heard yesterday that, of course, in 2015, the SNP votes plus Green votes was 51 point something. So it has been achieved before. And we know, of course, that the Tories haven't won a majority of votes in Scotland since, was it 1951 or 55 or something like that. So, there's no way that they're going to achieve anything near 50, yeah, 1955. So there's no way that they're going to be anywhere near that. But I think it is important to count um, all all parties that have an independence mandate or independence in their for Scotland in their manifesto, that they're counted towards that getting over the 50% or 51%.
Yep. So we look forward to seeing what more polls down the line bring in that topic, that item. So a better crack on if we're going to finish on time tonight. The UK government's economic forecaster has cut its prediction for UK growth this year, limiting the Treasury's spending firepower in the forthcoming budget, according to a report. In a move that will set the baseline for the Treasury's calculations before the budget in March, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, is understood to have provided a preliminary outlook that shows a weaker rebound this year from a period of high inflation and falling living standards. According to reports, the OBR has told the Chancellor he will have £9 billion less income after a fall in tax receipts compared with a forecast they had made in November. OBR staff provide Jeremy Hunt with the two independent assessments of the economy each year and how this will affect the government's finances based on the Treasury's spending plans. In a long-standing arrangement, the OBR gives an initial view to Treasury officials for them to begin the process of drafting budget proposals. In November, the OBR forecast that while the economy would shrink by 1.4% this year, it would pick up next year, with GDP averaging about 2.6% over the rest of the forecast period. However, the OBR now intends to reduce its forecasts by between 0.2 and 0.5% due to weakness in the economy and labour shortages. Inflation is expected to fall during the summer, taking the pressure off the Bank of England to continue raising the cost of borrowing. There have been increasing signs of economic optimism globally, with the head of the International Monetary Fund telling the World Economic Forum in Davos last week that the global economic outlook is less bad than feared. Rishi Sunak has pledged to halve inflation by the end of the year from its current level above 10%, and the OBR is expected to say that labour shortages will continue to pressure wages, creating what it calls second-round effects that will keep inflation higher for longer than it previously estimated. If inflation falls only modestly, Bank of England officials could keep borrowing costs elevated for a sustained period. So, Maureen, if you cast your mind back, Truss and Kwarteng, they ignored the OBR, or they cut out the OBR just before they crashed the economy last October. And then, as the item said, last November, the OBR produced a forecast of what they thought the economy would be like now. Now we're here, it turns out things are worse than they thought it would be. So this sets the scene for Mr Hunt's budget in March, and his budget directly impacts on Holyrood's budget. It's not looking good, is it?
No, it's not. And, it's obviously clear that the UK government are already preparing the electorate, if you like, for another awful budget to make us all, especially those who are poorer and most in need, even poorer, while the wealthier, as we know, get richer and richer under austerity. And austerity is a choice by the UK government, and it needn't be this way. But of course, it is worse in the UK because of Brexit, the word that is never mentioned in mainstream media by any of the parties if they can at all avoid it, because the OBR are saying that one of the things it's due to is labour shortages. And we see that on a daily basis affecting our health service, where there is a shortage of care workers, and many of people from Eastern Europe were working in care homes prior to Brexit. Also, because of the turmoil, the UK is not seen as such a good place to invest as it was previously. So, all in all, as a result of Brexit, never mind COVID and flu that other countries have experienced too, Brexit is the elephant in the room that is causing this, but of course will never be heard of, as I say, in the mainstream media.
Yes, the next topic that we'll be going on to actually touches more strongly on Brexit. Again, just maybe so that we finish on time, we can move straight on to that. We can maybe delve a little bit more into Brexit. So the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has said that the UK is in the most difficult position of all major world economies. Speaking to LBC, Mr Carney said that the problems facing the UK economy had been amplified by the separation from the European Union, by Brexit, and a UK recession is now more likely than not. It comes as the UK government's own Department for International Trade estimates showed that the UK has been knocked 15 years off course from meeting its export targets following Brexit. The figures show exports are set to fall from £739 billion last year to £707 billion next year. That's £293 billion short of the Tory government's 2020 £1 trillion commitment. Commenting, SNP economy spokesperson Stuart Hosey MP said, Brexit has been a disaster for the UK economy. These stark warnings underline why Scotland needs independence to escape Westminster control and regain our place in Europe. So, yeah, just a little complimentary fact to drop into this item. Britain's dropped, and since Brexit happened 6 years ago, Britain's dropped from being the fifth largest exporter in the world to the 14th. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the effect. And we were told that the deal that the government had negotiated with the EU was oven ready. But here it turns out it's almost like a no deal Brexit. There's been lots of talk recently about Britain going back into the EEFTA, the European Free Trade Association, or perhaps the EEA, the European Economic Area. But I don't know. Do you think, like me, I don't think that that the UK would be let back in at this stage. Is it too early?
I don't think, well, not just would we not be allowed back in to the uh, European Union, but the Tory party is so split, and the far right and the European Reform Group are so strong that no Tory Prime Minister would contemplate that. And I think EFTA and anything else are just kind of smoke screens to try and mitigate what is a really, really dire position. And we keep getting told by Westminster politicians, particularly the Tories, that all Western countries are experiencing the same thing. Well, they're not. I mean, I've said on this programme before that my daughter is just in the process of buying an apartment just outside Paris. And their deal with a mortgage provider is, listen for it, 1.86%. 1.86% fixed for 25 years. Now, mortgages in this country are nowhere near that and not fixed for 25 years. Similarly, this week there have been strikes in France because Macron wants to raise the pension age to 62. We're already at 67 and there's talk of moving it even higher. Now, this is kind of like going back to a third world country. It's so awful that Britain, which is supposed to be a wealthy country, is in this position because of the mismanagement of the economy for some successive governments, but particularly the Tories, since 2010. It's unbelievable that we have got such bad government in the UK at this time. And it's little wonder, going back to our first or second story post-Ukraine, that the polls are showing that people are thinking there must be a better way than this. And with the limited resources that the Scottish Government have, they've shown that they can do things differently. But firefighting, because of the poverty, increasing poverty being created by an incompetent Westminster government, is not what devolution was set up for. And so it's little wonder that people are moving towards independence and seeing that other small Scandinavian type countries the size of Scotland, with fewer resources, remember, than Scotland, can do better and can be fairer and more socially just. And I think the more that message gets out, the more the polls will shift in favour of independence.
Thank you, Maureen. And yeah, just to back up what you said, you're absolutely right. As far as I know, it's true to say that European economies are rebounding since the pandemic. The British economy is not. You said you don't think that the UK would get back into the EU or any of the EFTA or the EEA, but you think just quickly, do you think an independent Scotland would stand a better chance of getting back in?
Well, all the mood music says yes. And remember, the European Union want as many members as possible to join, as long as they, meet the criteria. And it is definitely the case that people in the SNP, for example, are keeping up their contacts with people in the European Union through lots of different countries, and reminding them that what was the famous phrase that Alan Smith said? Keep the lights on for us. We keep saying, keep the lights on for us. We are coming back. We want to come back. And I'm sure that the European Union will have us.
Thank you, Maureen. So the next item is the Treasury is reviewing its procedures after the Russian founder of a mercenary army was given permission to circumvent sanctions to attempt to silence a British journalist. The Treasury Minister, James Cartledge, said changes could be made after an outcry over the case, which the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, called an unconscionable decision to make it easier for Evgeny Prigozhin to pursue an unfounded claim. Cartledge said that even individuals under sanctions had a right to legal representation and licences could be granted for them to cover their own legal fees. However, I can confirm that in the light of recent cases and related to this question, the Treasury is now considering whether this approach is the right one and whether changes can be made without the Treasury assuming unacceptable legal risk, while ensuring that we adhere to the rule of law, he told the Commons. The revelations, published by Open Democracy, concern a libel case brought by Prigozhin, a key ally of Vladimir Putin, against Elliot Higgins, the founder of the investigative group Bellingcat. The documents and leaked emails show how Prigozhin's lawyers were given permission by the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation, the OFSI, that's a department inside the Treasury, to represent him despite the fact he was under sanctions. For years, Prigozhin denied all links to the Wagner group of mercenaries, and he brought a case against Higgins, but last year admitted he founded Wagner in 2014. Discreet Law, a London firm led by Roger Gerson, received government approval to engage with Prigozhin, Open Democracy has reported. McFadden said Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, should explain how this was allowed to happen. Number 10 has said all the decisions were made by officials without ministerial involvement. During an urgent question on the disclosures, Lamy accused Cartledge of evasiveness and added the government appears to have granted a waiver for a warlord that enabled him to launch a legal attack on a British journalist. If the now Prime Minister's Treasury had any hand in alleviating pressure on Prigozhin, I'm sure every member across this House would agree that this would be absolutely unconscionable. So, essentially, my question to you, Maureen, is should we be surprised at this story? It sounds like Londongrad, full of oligarchs. You've got Prigozhin, he's a Putin ally. He owns or runs a mercenary army, which I think is deployed in the Ukraine at the moment. You've got people like Lebedev in the House of Lords. I don't know. What do you think? What have you got to say?
Well, the things that come out never fail to surprise me. And it just shows you how Russian oligarchs have really inveigled their way into so many parts of London society, and how London has come to rely on their wealth to keep it the country it is. And increasingly internationally, we're just being seen as the sleaze capital for Russian oligarchs. And this story is deeply worrying, not just because it's the head of the Wagner group, who, let's not forget, are allowed to take prisoners out of Russian jails to recruit them for the Wagner army, and are known to be some of the most brutal fighters in the Ukraine war. And given that we have heard stories of full-time soldiers deserting the Russian army, increasingly the Wagner group are being relied on by Putin to fight the war for them. So I suspect, I'm not sure what you think, Brian, but the fact that this guy was allowed to bring this this libel case, is deeply worrying. But I suspect that the government has allowed it, and this idea that blame the ministers, you cannot, the civil servants, there was no ministerial involvement. The buck stops with the minister, whether they let the civil servants make the decision or not. So I don't buy that. It's not going to let somebody off the hook on this. But is it not so that lawyers in London can be paid for the work that they have done on the behalf of this Russian head of the Wagner group, Brigitsin? Sorry, I can't pronounce his name properly. But if you're going to have sanctions, they should be on everything, end of. And if it means that somebody can't bring a libel case, then so be it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I just kept hearing. Thank you for pronouncing the in the true Germanic form Wagner. So I did mean to do that, and then forgot as I was reading it out. But I think it came up in PMQs today, and in response to that, Elliot Higgins, the journalist involved, he tweeted, and kind of more or less said something similar to you. He said that he thinks that ministers are saying, well, I can't talk about this because it's a live case. And he's saying, well, it's a case about me and I don't mind if you talk about it. I want it to be discussed and you can use my name and I won't complain. And he's also worried that some blameless civil servant who was only doing what they were told is maybe going to end up taking the fall. So I think it's early days. I think this is going to run and run, as many other stories to do with Westminster and the Conservative government are going to do. But we're a little bit behind, so I'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Maureen. Nearly half of asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda are married, and a fifth have children, according to a new survey. Sorry, I'll say that again. Nearly half of asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda are married, and a fifth have children, according to a new survey. The findings were released by the Campaign Coalition Together with Refugees. That's a coalition of more than 500 national and local organisations representing refugees on Wednesday. The charity Care for Cali carried out the analysis. It also found that most asylum seekers threatened with deportation to Rwanda are from countries where more than 80% of people have had their refugee status recognised by the UK. 3 of the refugees in the sample identify as LGBTQ+, despite Rwanda being a country from which people fleeing persecution due to their sexual orientation can seek asylum in the UK. The news was made by former Home Secretary Priti Patel, who launched a scheme to deter people crossing the channel in small boats, saying they were not genuine asylum seekers and were elbowing out the women and children who are at risk and fleeing persecution. Nearly three quarters, that's 72% of people in a sample of 213 people who were threatened with being sent to Rwanda by the Home Office, have fled from countries such as Afghanistan, Eritrea, Iran, Sudan, and Syria. At least 82% of people from these countries have successful applications in the UK. All of the people surveyed received notices of intent from the Home Office between August 2022 and the 17th of January 2023. Anyone receiving such a notice is at risk of being sent to Rwanda. 13 of those in the new analysis are women. Nearly half of the total sample, that's 42%, are married or engaged, and 20% have children. 2/3 have reported being victims of modern slavery or torture. When the scheme was first piloted, the Home Office said it would be aimed at single men. So, Maureen, we often hear that this talk about the people that are refugees or people that are seeking asylum coming across on these small boats. We're being told that because they're all male, then they can't. They're just economic refugees, and so this would seem to blow that argument out of the water. But can I maybe also just tie this in with the fact that this is the British state creating policies that break up families, isn't it? And especially when you hear the news that over 200 children that have gone missing from hotels that are run by the Home Office recently, and they're unaccompanied, and they can't even trace who these kids were or where they've gone. This just seems like just a complete, just for families, how can you survive with these kind of policies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely broken system, and we've known that for a while now, both under Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, that the immigration system is completely and utterly broken. And, we have been told more recently, or what I've seemed to think has been coming forward more predominantly, is that many of the asylum seekers in small boats are young Iranian men and boys. And what you've just said, Brian, tends to go against that view. And, very often, because very often people are coming to link up with family members, extended family members perhaps, who are already here legitimately. And because their applications aren't being processed quickly, then they end up being candidates for deportation to Rwanda, or, as you rightly said, and I was going to say if you didn't, that younger men and children end up going missing and presumably into, it doesn't bear thinking about, but slavery and other things. So to say that the system is anything other than broken would be totally and utterly wrong. And there are human rights issues here, and it adds yet another layer of our of what people think of us abroad, and that everything else is that the system in Britain is a failing democracy, because if you just listen to the Tories, you would think that we took the vast majority of asylum seekers, which is we only take a small fraction compared to most other European countries, and you never hear of them having such wages like you hear from what is happening under Westminster Tory rule in relation to immigration. So it is a really situation, and it's not deterring people. That's the point, that the number of people coming across in small boats is increasing all the time, not decreasing. Is that not a sign of failure, and you think you might do something differently? But no, not, because they keep pandering to their very right-wing Tory member base, hoping that things will keep them in power, which of course, hopefully, and it can soon enough, the better that it doesn't.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, I think it's one of these things that's going to continue to take up time in the news. With your permission, can I just ask you maybe a one answer question, just because time's against us? But can you see policies like this coming out of any government in Holyrood?
Absolutely not. Not in a million years. There would be a complete and utter uproar, not just from the backbenches of the SNP, but hopefully from Labour and Liberal Democrats as well. No, not in a million years. And one example to show you that that's not likely to happen is the way that in our time to get our social security system, where we have benefits devolved to the Scottish Parliament, to get it right and to get it based on dignity and respect, rather than the horrible way that the DWP works. So no, that just simply wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I thought that might be your answer. So I'll move on to the next topic. Microsoft is investigating an outage that has hit users of its products worldwide, including Teams and Outlook. The global tech firm said it was investigating issues impacting multiple Microsoft 365 services. That's a suite of products that includes its Teams messaging and video conferencing service. Outlook email and Word and Excel programs are also part of that. Microsoft 365 products have millions of users worldwide, and early this morning, thousands of them reported outages on Down Detector. That's a website that registers problems with tech products. They included users in the UK, the US, Australia, and Brazil, highlighting problems not only with 365 programs, but also the gaming service, Xbox Live, and Microsoft's cloud computing business, Azure. In the UK, outage reports appeared to peak at about 8 a.m. GMT time. Microsoft tweeted that it had isolated the problem to networking configuration issues and were analysing the best mitigation strategy to address these without causing additional impact. It added, "We've rolled at 9:26 a.m. We've rolled back a network change that we believe is causing impact." Last week, Microsoft said it was cutting 10,000 jobs, or less than 5% of its global workforce, citing a post-pandemic shift in digital spending habits and weakness in the global economy. Its US tech peers have also announced job cuts, including Facebook's parent Meta and the Google owner Alphabet, with admissions that they had overexpanded during the coronavirus pandemic being a common theme. So, Maureen, are you like me? I'm slightly concerned about this interconnectedness. There's a outage, presumably somewhere in the US, that's affected people and businesses all over the world. It seems to me it only takes one small cog in a wheel to fail, and then everything fails. Or is that just me being paranoid?
Yeah, well, I suppose we can be be thankful that one thing out with Outlook and Microsoft that caused it. It wasn't some sort of malware or interference from some people who can affect these things. It does seem to have been an internal thing, and often we see systems trying to upgrade, they don't exactly work very well. We've seen that, for example, when the banks try to do that. So I'm not sure that it is something to worry about too much, but obviously, when something like this does happen, people do go into a panic, don't they? And if a lot of conference calls and Teams calls were interrupted this morning, it won't have put people in a very good humour. But hopefully, I think these things are pretty. But we do run this technologies nowadays that when we do hear something like this, it does worry a lot of folk.
Yeah, it probably is just my age. I mean, I'm dreading having to, the day when I'm going to have to buy a new fridge or a new cooker or a new, I don't know, oven. It's like, yeah, because this internet of things. Anyway, I better move on and stop the conspiracy theories, maybe. So, the next story is Scottish Water is undertaking repairs following the burst water main, which interrupted water supplies to a large area of Glasgow last night. Teams arrived on site quickly to begin assessing the damaged 36-inch water main at Auchenhowie Road in Milngavie. Glasgow Road and part of Auchenhowie Road remain closed as a result of the significant damage caused. Scottish Water is working with utility partners to assess the impact and damage caused and to allow a safe excavation of the damaged water main for repairs to be undertaken. Traffic management is currently being finalised due to other utility works in the area. Local diversions remain in place while the repairs are carried out and the road reinstated. Drivers are urged to follow all signage. Supplies to 100,000 properties in Glasgow city centre, Kelvinside, Tradeston, Ibrox, Knightswood, Yoker, Scotstoun and Partick are now largely restored. As the network recharges, there may be some small pockets of customers who will take longer to get back into supply. Once water supplies are restored, some customers may experience some discoloured water supply. For brown discoloration, this is normal after the network has been interrupted. Customers are advised to run the cold water kitchen tap to run it at reduced pressure until this runs clear. If you experience white water caused by air in the water supply following the interruption, this will settle within 24 or 48 hours. Any customers who require additional support are encouraged to visit Scottish Water's website at www.scottishwater.co.uk or to call the customer helpline on 0800 0778 778. I'll just repeat that number. The customer helpline is 0800 0778 778. So, Maureen, my paranoia, I think, is still intact. When I went to fill the water jug before we started tonight's show, the water pressure in here in Cowcaddens was a little bit sort of, I don't know, it was weak, it was low, it was a kind of, it was struggling. And this is where the paranoia comes in. In my place of work, in the past week, there's been 2 power cuts. Um, so, is it I don't know, is everything falling apart? Or is it just me?
I think it's your paranoia, I hate to say, but I was brought up on a farm that had a private water supply. So some summers it would run dry, and it was a dairy farm. So the cows had priority over us. So where I live now, we frequently get power cuts, and we have filled flasks and candles and things to the ready. So I doubt you wouldn't manage to live in a rural area, Brian, very well. But I think this is to be expected after the big freeze that we have. When there's a thaw, we get burst pipes, and it's really unfortunate for those that are affected. But to be honest, under Scottish Water, it's now pretty rare that we get things like this. And I think we should be grateful that we have a water supplier that's still under public ownership, and our water bills are lower than those under the private ones in England. And I do think that Scottish Water are a pretty efficient company. I sat on committees in the Parliament where they had to come and give us updates on performance once or twice a year. And while there's always room for improvement, I think Scottish Water have been pretty good at using their land for wind turbines and increasing hydropower, and they have been quite significant in the push towards renewables in Scotland. So I totally understand that this is, unsatisfactory for those affected. But they seem to have been pretty quick in trying to repair the damage, and they're always usually pretty good at coming with bottled water if folk are affected for a long while. So yeah, I think I have to grin and bear it for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. And yes, you're absolutely right. I am completely transparent. I am a city boy. There's no doubt about it, an urban person. So spot on there. And you're absolutely right. I think to draw comparison with the water companies in England, when you see the practices that are going on there about effluents being pumped directly into rivers without being treated, it's quite a stark contrast. And continuing the theme of Brian's paranoia, even the clock is against us. So I'll move on to the next item. The development of new cancer treatments in Scotland is to receive major funding of up to £4 million, providing future hope for people diagnosed with the disease. Glasgow's Experimental Cancer Medicine Centre, the ECMC, and the Paediatric ECMC in the city will receive up to £2,286,575, while Edinburgh's ECMC will receive up to £1,796,899 over the next 5 years to help doctors and scientists develop the cancer treatments of the future for both adults and children. The funding has been made possible by a partnership between Cancer Research UK, the Scottish Government, with the Little Prince's Trust providing funding specifically for children's cancers. The investment has been welcomed by retired head teacher Jim McCallum from Paisley, who was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma in 2017. His lymphoma didn't respond to standard treatment, but he was able to take part in the CART T-cell therapy clinical trial at the Glasgow ECMC in 2020 and is now cancer-free and not taking any treatment for the disease. He said, "They can't find any trace of the cancer now. I was just so glad they had a treatment I could try, and taking part in a trial also has the potential to help others. It's all about gathering information." Glasgow and Edinburgh are part of a network of 17 ECMCs across the UK, funded by Cancer Research UK, which delivers clinical trials of new experimental treatments in patients. Since 2007, when the network was first established, around 30,000 patients have taken part in 2,100 clinical trials. This funding will allow new experimental treatments, including immunotherapies and cell therapies, to be developed for a wide variety of cancers, especially those that particularly affect the Scottish population. It will also improve existing treatments, especially through targeting therapies more precisely to the patient's tumour, supporting trials across a wide range of treatments from innovative drug therapies to the latest advances in radiotherapy treatment. ECMCs work in conjunction with local NHS facilities to provide access to cutting-edge trials and treatments to help find new ways to detect monitor and treat the disease to help beat cancer sooner. So, Maureen, a good news story at last, and the gentleman mentioned in the story, I'm just looking for his name again. Um, it's it's excellent, isn't it? And as a previous Minister for Health, forgive me because I didn't introduce you again at the start of the show. I didn't say that, Maureen, you were an MSP representing Aberdeen South and North Kincardine back in the day, and you were also a former Minister for Health at Holyrood. So you've probably got some extra insight that you can give us into this good news story.
Well, it is a very good news story. And, you know, the advances made in cancer diagnosis and treatment have been immense. And we're really now getting to a stage where a person's treatment for cancer is really tailored specifically to their needs and to their makeup. And that is just amazing, instead of the kind of everybody given, the same dose of chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatment of the past. You can really tailor and home in, if you like, on the particular type of cancer and where it is in the body, rather than blanket zapping of it. So that's why cancer recovery rates are improving all the time. But that doesn't get away from the fact that prevention is much better than cure. And the Detect Cancer Early program is one of the most successful programs, whether it be for breast screening or the bowel cancer screening that was introduced in Scotland way before it was introduced in England and Wales. So Scotland has a good track record on this, and being able to find this money together with, generous donations from the public through the Cancer Research UK charity, which is an excellent organisation. When I had to deal with them, they were excellent. So, it's a good news story, thank goodness.
Thank you, Maureen. And the next story kind of complements that. People struggling to pay their council tax during the cost of living crisis are being encouraged to check if they are eligible for money off their bill. The Council Tax Reduction Scheme, that's a CTR scheme, is unique to Scotland and helps people on low incomes save an average of £750 a year on their council tax bill. Those eligible can also save up to 35% on their water and waste charges. The latest figures published by the Scottish Government show 455,220 recipients received CTR in November 2022, meaning around 1 in 5 households were benefiting from the scheme. Public Finance Minister Tom Arthur visited Citizens Advice and Rights Fife today, that's Wednesday the 25th of January, to meet staff advising people on dealing with the cost of living crisis. He said, "We know that this cost of living crisis is hammering people on lower incomes and those already living in poverty. It is vital that people know where to go to get advice and support." He went on to say the Council Tax Reduction Scheme will celebrate its 10th anniversary in April, and Scottish households have saved more than £3 billion on their council tax since it was introduced. The support it provides has never been more important, and I urge people to check whether they are eligible. Information can be obtained from local citizens' advice bureaus, local councils, and Money Talk team service promoted by the Scottish Government, as well as online. So for me, Maureen, it was interesting again to note that this is another scheme that's unique to Scotland. And with your experience from being an MSP at Holyrood, is there anything that you can add to that aspect of the story?
To be honest, to my shame, I didn't know about this. But it's obviously great that once again the Scottish Government is taking steps to mitigate poverty that so many families are falling into. And normally when we talk about this, we talk about the child benefit schemes that the Scottish Government has introduced to try and mitigate child poverty. But the fact that 1 in 5 households are eligible for this council tax reduction scheme is really important to know. And we keep saying that people should get in touch with charities to find out if they are. You mentioned some of them, Brian, the Citizens Advice. There's also Step Change and some Christian charities available. I just wondered in your notes there if you had the online website, because I think for many that would be the first port of call if you can work it out yourselves, whether you might be eligible for it before getting in touch with the charities. It might be a good idea, because we know how proud many families are about claiming their benefits. We know in terms of the benefits in general that people are, that the take up is not nearly reaching the amount that is available, or the amount that governments calculate should be claimed. So I think in this period of really severe austerity, that people should be getting a finance check to see if they are eligible for more benefits, because very, very often they are. And it would be good to know the online website. Yeah, probably it might be on mygov.scot, and then type in council tax reduction scheme would be my first port of call, Brian, I think.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, and maybe I think you're right. It probably will be mygov.scot, but maybe we could send a tweet out after the show with the website address or something like that. Well, that was our final item tonight, Maureen. Thank you very much once again for giving us some of your precious time and for being here with us. Just before we do go, just to let you know that tomorrow we've got a special to cover, or to for National Holocaust Memorial Day, and that's going to be hosted by Jackie Kemp, and we've got two guests, John Haidu and Smail Besho. So I would recommend that you all tune in tomorrow for that special show. And Maureen, just before we go, we haven't mentioned really, apart from at the start of the show, about this being Burns Night. I'm not going to try and recite any Burns poetry, but if you do want to hear somebody reference it, then I would recommend that you fire up Prime Minister's Questions, which was earlier today in Westminster, and listen to Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP party, and his question to Rishi Sunak, and then you'll get a little Burns quote nicely framed in a perfect context there. I can't recommend it any higher. So, Maureen, thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you again, I'm sure, sometime. And so before I go, I just want to remind you all that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view, as you know. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes for you. And so now I'll let you get on with. Also, you can, if that's not possible, then you can perhaps be a volunteer, and again, you'll be able to contact us via the website. And that would be great. So I'll let you go on with your Burns Night. Maureen, once again, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.